Hi everyone, and welcome back to Just for Dad. This is the last episode of the summer mini series. Just talking about basically like how it's better to start young and like how with teens and young adults and things like that, that even with them starting to like make a lot of fundamental changes in society and doing different things that some may say are like maybe too like much for their age, it's okay because like I said, it's better to start young. But yeah, I'm really excited for today's episode. I have a really lovely guest who I'm super excited that I get to talk to and to ask her some different questions and things like that. So I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself and then I'll talk about how I like came in contact with you.
Sure. My name is Olivia Schramkowski. I'm 18 years old. I just graduated from the Atlanta public school system, but in the fall, I will be headed to Duke University with a hopeful major in public policy, and I am currently the Georgia State Director for March for Our Lives.
Yeah. So like you guys heard there, like that's really a fundamental and really like just extremely like amazing thing that she's doing being the director for March for Our Lives in Georgia. But yeah, so that's basically what we're talking about, and that's kind of like what the episode is centered around. But the way I like met her, I guess, is because I guess technically we haven't really met, but like the way I came in contact with her was because a mutual like friend that we have uh would like kind of like repost a lot of things that she was doing, and I was like, wow, that's really cool, like that's actually super amazing. And I couldn't even like really, I guess, like like not like I couldn't believe it, but like it was just like, wow, like this is like beyond amazing. So I was like, yeah. So like I messaged her and I asked her like if she would like come on for an episode, and I was really happy that she agreed to. So thank you so much for that. But yeah, so like I said, that's just what we're talking about. But before getting into the episode prompts, just to give like a little context on exactly what March for Our Lives is, basically March for Our Lives is a demonstration and protest targeted towards gun control legislation. It began as a student-led demonstration on March 24th, 2018 in Washington, D.C., after the Parkland school shooting in Florida. And since then, they now have 300 chapters and three chapters nationally, as well as global and national support through various protests held internationally. So now into the episode prompts, but just to get us started, so how exactly did you initially get into the political and activist realm, and at what age?
Yeah, so I've kind of been interested in politics my whole life. My grandmother was super into presidents, and so I kind of became super into presidents. And then, kind of just as I matured, it was kind of like, oh, well, I'm into presidents, so I guess I'm into politics. But I didn't really get fully into politics until my freshman year when I was a Senate page for the Georgia Senate, and I kind of realized that politics could be something that someone did not just for a hobby, but actually as a career.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that I really liked politics, especially the community aspect of politics. And from there, I did my best to try to get involved. And March for Our Lives was really one of the only organizations at the time that really centered young people.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was the easiest way to get involved.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. It's interesting that you mentioned from when you were a page for the Senate, because I think I did that as well when I was in eighth grade. Yeah, and that was definitely interesting and fun to do as well. So yeah. But so the next prompt is, did you always see yourself doing work with fighting for change in the community?
I would say yes and no. I think I've kind of always thought that I would work in politics since it's something that I've always been interested in.
Mhm.
But I don't think I ever really saw myself doing like the activism and the community outreach that I do now. Um, I think I kind of just always assumed that I would like go to college and get a degree in political science and then just like naturally like get a job and then like go from there and just be in politics. I don't think I ever really imagined that like before I even went to college that I would like have a job and it would be focused mainly like not necessarily like on politics and policy, but more on like the community outreach side and like activism.
Yeah. So with you organizing a March for Our Lives protest, and that's like more than a big deal, but like how did you get the opportunity to do so?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, I started out in March for Our Lives my freshman year, and I kind of just uh, got like continued to use every opportunity that was given to me. So like I would go to all the events at my chapter, and eventually I would be on the Georgia State board, and then I applied to be the Georgia State director once our other two state directors left. And so it's me and another girl who just graduated, and we were co-directors together. And so it's kind of our job to put on these events. And we didn't really think anything of it. We had been doing events for a while now, and then the Uvalde shooting happened.
Hmm.
And I think about a week later, we got an email from like the national organizers, and they were like, "Hey, like we're doing like a reinsurgency of like the marches that we did in 2018 in honor of like the Uvalde shooting, and like we were wondering if you wanted to put on the Atlanta March." And at first, it was very daunting, partially because when I went to the march in 2018, I was just like another protester, and then
Hmm.
now, like 4 years later, I was the one like leading it.
Yeah.
And it was really just me and this other girl, and we had 2 weeks. And in 2 weeks, we like became experts on like press and permits and everything else. And
Mhm.
so it was definitely really hard, but it also really taught me a lot. I think now I have a lot of skills that most people don't necessarily get until
Yeah.
later in life. But now that I've like put on this big thing, I know a lot more about like event planning and like protests and everything else that kind of goes along with it.
Yeah. That's really cool. And I didn't really realize, I guess, or like it didn't really sink in that you guys only had 2 weeks to plan it. But the fact that you were able to like do something that I guess like extraordinary, something that foundational in such a short amount of time is really cool. So is there anyone specific who would classify as your role model and maybe someone who encouraged you or inspired you to start or continue what you do?
Yeah, so I would say my role model is probably the late John Lewis. I had an opportunity to work with him through March for Our Lives, and one of the things that we got to do is go out and register voters together. And I also had an opportunity to hear him speak. And he really taught me like what it really means to be a leader and like the
Mhm.
foundation of community organizing. I was, I think, a sophomore in high school when I like first like got to meet him and know him. And at the time I was like very focused on like, okay, like I know politics is something that I want to do later in life. So like I'm gonna check these boxes and I'm gonna get all these roles and I'm gonna get this experience, and like that's kind of all that I'm doing.
Mhm.
And he really like showed me the importance of being in the community and the importance of like loving what you do, because if you love what you do, then like some of the scary things that like you have to go through, or like the things that you need bravery for, they don't seem as hard because it's something that like you're truly invested in.
Yeah.
And it kind of made me reevaluate what I was doing and where I was, and also like note that sometimes being a leader is like stepping up and doing the hard things with others.
Mhm.
So he just really kind of guided me at that time in my journey when I was still like kind of figuring out like what I was doing in activism. And he really made a difference in like where I am now because of that.
Yeah. And I think with John Lewis, like so many people look up to him just for like the wise words that he can give and for being such a like just like an incredible person like all around. You can tell like he's really genuine about the things that he like believed in. And I think that yeah, that definitely helps with like with who you're looking up to when you can tell that they're really like genuine about what they're talking about and they really believe what they're saying. It definitely makes a difference compared to like some people who just kind of say things. But yeah, so with that though, who's been your like biggest supporter throughout your journey?
I would probably say my parents. I don't think they ever imagined that like they would have a daughter that before like that went to college like would be doing all of this stuff. And
Mhm.
so they've been very supportive. Like before I could drive, they were like driving me to protests and like driving me to meetings. And they've let me miss school on a couple of occasions for some fun and important things. And they've just truly been there for me and kind of supported me throughout all of this, and like whenever like I needed them to do something, especially with the march, because like you said, like we only had 2 weeks to plan it. Like
Mhm.
I stored like massive amounts of stuff in my house.
Yeah.
Like they didn't
Wow.
say anything about it. And like my dad packed the car that we were taking because we had like so much stuff, and so they've always been very helpful, and they've always like done what I've needed them to do without any questions asked, and
Mhm.
so they've definitely helped me throughout this.
Yeah, that's really sweet. having a good like support system definitely makes things like 10 times easier. So I'm really happy that you have that. Um, so what do you feel will bring about real change when it comes to gun control and make gun control more than just a conversation?
I think that we need to start focusing on like where we have common ground. I think that a lot of times, especially now, there's a lot of like division and polarization, and government has become more of like beating the other side as opposed to making the world a better place.
Yeah,
And I know like the Republican saying is always like, oh, well, like it's the people, not the guns. And while like that's just a soundbite, it kind of starts with we do have common ground there because we do both recognize that there are people that don't need guns.
yeah,
And then like starting from there and being like, okay, well like if we both agree that there are people that don't need guns, then like what are some laws that we can pass that don't necessarily affect you as a gun owner, but make sure that the people that you're talking about can't get access to guns. And so I think
yeah,
that doing that in a non-judgmental way and also realizing that like you can be pro-gun and anti-gun violence at the same time. I know living in Georgia that sounds like a super big like revelation,
yeah,
but it's true. And I mean, I've talked to people who are on the other side who agree that like, like go hunting and have guns, but also agree that like gun violence is a huge problem in our nation. And I think another part of that is we need everyone to be involved in this movement.
yeah,
Before the Uvalde shooting and before like the marches that we did, I don't think we ever got that much publicity in like the work that we did. And then we did the march, and all of a sudden, like I'm doing all these events, and all these people are like asking me how they can help.
yeah,
And I think that we need to keep that momentum because if everyone continues to be involved, then the conversation stays on gun violence, and then people are pressured to take action, and then their congressmen and their congresswomen listen to them, and then bills get passed. So I think that one noting that like both sides can be pro gun violence prevention is important, and then making sure that everyone is involved is really it really is what it's gonna take to have action.
yeah. And I think a key thing of what you said that I really liked was when you mentioned about how with like the two major political parties with Republicans, Democrats, it became like it's become in the past few years like a beating each other's like sides and opinions and views instead of trying to work together for the betterment of like this country and the nation as a whole, because really both sides have like a common goal of making this like country a nice and safe place to live in, and that should really be the main focus than just, oh, what are our like opinions and our viewpoints that may be differing but still are all towards like reaching a common goal. So yeah, I think that's something that I'm waiting for the day to see when it's actually like they can work together and aren't just like both hitting each other's ideas down and stuff like that, which obviously I'm sure like we have like our own personal beliefs and opinions and probably have like a clear side of where we're at, like I do personally, like, but at the same time it's like I'm not exactly like, I'm still open to hearing what someone else has to say regardless of what political party, if that makes sense. So yeah, I hope that that can become like a nationwide thing where people are actually like being able to openly express their viewpoints, I guess, if that makes sense. But yeah. So the next prompt is, what do you hope to see current politicians do to help with gun violence?
Yeah, so as we're talking, the House today just voted on renewing the assault weapons ban. And that's super important. That was passed with bipartisan support some years ago, and then we let it run out, and so assault weapons stopped being banned. And I think that that's a really important step forward.
Mhm.
um, I also want to mention the gun violence prevention legislation that was passed a month or so ago, like right after we did our marches. And that was the first time that there's been federal legislation on gun violence prevention in over 30 years. Um, so I think continuing to move forward with those laws and make sure that they are put in place correctly. Um, a lot of the what has to do with the law that was just passed by the Senate and the House and Biden. is that there's funding that can go towards mental health and school resource officers. And so we want to make sure that that funding is distributed correctly. And then I also think that working towards more common sense gun laws is something that needs to be done. Not every state, and Georgia's one of the states that doesn't have one, has a red flag law, uh,
Hmm.
which basically means that a judge can decide whether or not like you should be able to have a gun, which can be important. Like if you're arrested for a crime and like obviously you're not of sound mind, like you can still own a gun. Um, so passing red flag laws is really important. And just continuing to make sure that we have these common sense gun laws in place that doesn't restrict weapons from those that use them for like hunting and everything, but make sure that bad people don't get guns. Like that's really what we're trying to do. And then
Yeah.
I also think that gun violence is an issue that kind of encompasses like other issues. So
Hmm.
legislating around like mental health and decriminalizing poverty is also really important when we talk about like what action we want to see passed.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So I didn't write down this prompt, but I just remember that I actually should have included it, and I just don't want to forget to add it on later on. But I was going to say that. So I know that you said that you were invited by the White House to hear President Biden speak on voting rights. I was going to ask like if you could just shed some light on that and how that experience was.
Yeah, so with March for Our Lives and then also with other organizations, I've been a big proponent of voting rights. I believe that right now, voting rights is really one of the only ways that we can ensure that like the government is doing what we want them to do.
Hmm.
And that can be frustrating because a lot of times like people are suppressed and like their voting rights are taken away, but if we make sure that everyone that wants to vote that their voice is being heard, and like we can better put people in power that support our ideals. So I've been a very big proponent of that. And so the White House invited me to hear the speech that was done uh, in Atlanta about voting rights. And that was a really cool experience, partially because I at that time I was a senior in high school, and to be invited like by the White House to see the president was amazing.
Yeah.
And we were surrounded by a bunch of like politicians that were like so much older than I was, and it was a very surreal experience. And I think one, it made me proud to be an Atlantan and to be a Georgian,
Hmm.
because I think that one of the reasons why Biden chose to have the speech there is because of the significance we had like in the civil rights movement and in the voting rights movement.
Yeah.
And so that was really cool to be a part of that. And it was also interesting because at the time, this was January of 2022. He said that he was for getting rid of the filibuster in order to pass voting rights. And eventually, he didn't get rid of the filibuster, and then voting rights died. And that's kind of come back into the conversation in terms of gun violence prevention and also the new ruling with abortion.
Hmm.
Biden recently just said that he was willing to get rid of the filibuster to kind of legislate on a whole bunch of priorities that have suddenly like become noticed.
Yeah.
So I thought it was interesting that he brought it up once and it was supposed to be like a super big like bombshell moment, and then nothing happened, and
Yeah.
then he brought it up again. Um, so I definitely think that obviously like continue to advocate for things and like watch out because Biden is doing a lot, but he definitely could be doing more.
Hmm.
So always like hold politicians accountable. But also like at the end of the day, it was really cool to be recognized for the work that I've done, and it was a really big honor to be invited by the White House. So that was definitely something that'll be in my memories forever for sure.
Yeah. I think also like when I first reached out to you, I didn't know that that had happened until I like asked you for that list. But that's really cool, and that is an extremely huge honor, like you said. So I know that you've worked to make politics as well as political and governmental websites more accessible. So I was gonna say, in what ways have you done that?
Yeah, so I work with a nonprofit organization known as Ballotpedia, and Ballotpedia's main goal is to make politics more accessible. So it does that through like a bunch of articles and charts. Like ranging from like just like basic like legislative, executive, judicial branches, all the way down to like the new judicial rulings that just came out. And
Mhm.
so in 2020, my job was to go through I think it was like 20 industries in every state and
Mhm.
look and see like what the regulations were regarding coronavirus. And it would probably take me like 1 to 2 hours to like find one regulation on one industry. And
Yeah.
I started to realize that like if I wasn't like working doing it for my job, like I would have quit forever ago. And so like so many people probably had no idea what the regulations were because they couldn't find it on the website. And so that really made like started to make me think about how government websites are super inaccessible and how like the information that people need is never in the right spot and people have to
Yeah.
click like 50 links to get to where they needed to go. So I've advised a few political campaigns and like different politicians on like their websites and how website design should be flexible and how like the reason that the coronavirus regulations weren't up on like the main page is because it was like a new thing, and
Mhm.
the way that they had formulated their website, it was never meant to like show a lot of regulations in like one place. So
Mhm.
like starting to kind of bring up the idea of like websites are probably how most people reach these politicians and reach these
Yeah.
governments. So starting to kind of think like how are people getting the information they need? So that was one part of it. And then just in general, political accessibility is a really big passion of mine. I think kind of thinking about um, why certain people don't get involved in politics and why certain people do, and just doing my best to kind of really reach out to people and hear their own stories and their own side about why they don't get involved in politics. Because, like I mentioned before, we need everyone involved in order to really make sure the government is doing what it should be doing. So I've just always had a passion for political accessibility and just making sure that people can find politics as fun and as easy as I do.
Yeah. So I think like with everything that you were saying is like, accessibility is one of like the most like key components because it's like obviously if people can't easily access it, are they really inclined to like try to get involved or even sometimes even something as like simple as some people might think as like registering to like vote. Some people don't even like take that step because they're like, oh, sometimes they're like, oh, there's no point or oh, it's too difficult to like do. And like you said, with that whole accessibility thing. So yeah, I'm really glad that like you're working to make those websites more accessible and make it just a lot easier so that people don't have to like think that it's such a tiring task and things like that. So that's really good. Um, Next prompt is, has there ever been a time when someone has tried to limit the amount of work you have done because you're young? And if so, how did you deal with it?
Yeah, I think on one side there definitely has been situations where that's happened. I've also kind of done it to myself. I know like there have been a lot of times where I've like looked around and the next like oldest person is probably like in their 30s. Um And so that's always been hard for me is to like tell myself that like I belong here and like I might be young, but like I still can do the same work that everyone else is doing. And as
Mhm.
long as I'm capable, like no one's judging me and being like, oh, well, like she's too young, she doesn't know anything. And so there definitely were a lot of times where I kind of put myself in that place and was like, oh, like because you can't drive, you shouldn't be like going out and canvassing and like
Mhm.
you shouldn't be doing all of these things, and oh, since you can't vote, like you shouldn't be advocating for like voting rights. And so I think with that, it takes a lot of self assurance to like let yourself know that like if you think you can do it, you probably can. And also there probably have been points in my life where because of the experiences that I've had, I probably am more capable
Yeah.
than some of those people because I have like the life experience of having to do
Hmm.
it. And then I think on the other side, like I mentioned in the beginning, like one of the reasons that I got involved in March for Our Lives is because it was really one of the only organizations that kind of like centered young people
Hmm.
and allowed young people to take on bigger roles.
Yeah.
Because I really wanted to be super involved, but everywhere that I was looking was like, oh, like you can be a volunteer and like you can phone bank, like, and that was really it. And like phone banking's important, but I knew that I wanted to do something more. And so like there definitely have been times where that has happened. And I think I really have a problem with like the qualifications that are generally needed for an internship. And I think some of those are needed. Um, but I think that there should be more internship opportunities for people that are in high school and sometimes even for like middle schoolers. I think
Yeah.
um in high school, like by the time I was a sophomore, I had already done so much work and I already had so much experience. And I really like wanted to further that experience and make something meaningful out of it. And it was really hard to find an internship that would let me do that because so many say that you either need to be in college or that you need to have graduated from college.
Hmm.
And like I said, like I get that some of those qualifications are necessary. Um, but I also think that there were a lot of times where I would be reading the job descriptions and being like, I already do that. Like, I already have experience in this. Like, I don't need a college degree to be
Yeah.
doing these things because I'm already doing them.
Hmm.
So I think that that's definitely been a big thing is like struggling with finding internships and opportunities that really allow me to do more political work on a professional level. And so I think that's something that companies should be better about, is just like allowing more young people to take on these opportunities because we have so many ideas and we're
Yeah.
also lucky enough to like not be burned out. And so really like putting younger people in these positions could shake up your entire company in such a good way and no one's taking advantage of that.
Yeah. And then like even with like the whole name of this series, like, oh, it's better to start young. It really is better to start young because that helps you like build experience and starting when you're older or like letting, I guess like, or like even okay, not letting, but like other people like saying to younger people kind of like or implying that, oh, like maybe they shouldn't be doing what they're doing because they're not old enough or they're too young or whatever. Or maybe sometimes some of them aren't even taken as serious because they're younger. It's just really not like fair because in the sense that it's like just for you to be like a certain age to actually be taken serious doesn't really make that much sense. In addition to like with what I was saying, like experience is the best thing, and experience should start as young as you possibly can. Like getting that experience, like working with different organizations, like with whatever you hope to like be doing long term. Like don't wait until you're older because even when you're like it should be good that whenever you get to like the typical like age or whatever, at that point you can say, oh, I've been doing this for years and years, and not just like, oh, I just started. So yeah, and I'm glad that you like like I guess like retrained your mind and like thought to yourself like, like I've been doing this for like a while and I'm more than capable enough to do this. So that's really good. Okay, like, well, the next question is, do you hope to go into politics yourself one day? But obviously the answer is yes. So I'm just gonna word it to, is there like a specific like position that you would want to take or yeah.
Yeah, I think first I'd love to be a state senator in Georgia. And it
Mhm.
kind of all goes back to like my first experience being a Senate page. I just really loved this sounds so weird, but like I really loved the atmosphere and also like a lot of like the procedure that goes into the Georgia Senate. Like there's a
Yeah.
lot with like the well, which is like where the senators stand. And I also really liked that because their districts are so small, like they really can connect with people. Like half of my job was making sure that the senators on the floor like met with their constituents.
Yeah.
And I'm such like a people person, and so I think being a state senator is definitely something that I'm interested in. And then in the future, like maybe being like representing Georgia in the Senate, like in DC, would
Hmm.
also be super fun. I'm a really big fan of Georgia. Georgia is my ride or die state, so I'd love to represent her in politics in whatever way I can.
Yeah, that's nice. So, okay, I guess that kind of ties in, but if there's something else with it to like expand on, but is there one specific goal that you would like to see achieved?
Ooh. Okay. This one's like a really lofty goal and it probably won't happen, but I'd really love, and this goes back to like what I was saying about being interested in like political accessibility.
Hmm.
I'd love to solve like the youth crisis in America when it comes to political apathy. I
Hmm.
think it's super interesting that like half of our generation is super invested in politics and then the other half has absolutely nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
And so I would really love that my one goal would be to like solve the political apathy going on in our nation. And maybe I'll do it with the help of some others. Maybe it's a really lofty goal. Um, but I'm just super, and even if it's like not completely solving it, but like finding one solution that at least helps,
Yeah.
I think is definitely a goal of mine.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. I've never like really, I guess, like thought too much in it, but you're definitely right with like how like so many people are like involved in like the political aspect and all that and like different things like that. And then like other side, like you said, it's just like not there at all. But yeah, that's pretty interesting. Okay, so now we're actually on the last prompt, which is if you could give one message to listeners, what would it be?
I think my one message would be to be proactive. A lot of the opportunities I've had really came from the fact that I really just knew what I want and I got it. I remember like when I first knew that I wanted to like be more invested in politics, I would sit in front of my computer and Google like programs in politics or like political internships for teens in Georgia and like would go through like so many Google searches just like trying to find like something I could apply to. And then
Yeah,
obviously like apply to everything you can and just continue to like grow in your knowledge. I think that being proactive and like knowing like, hey, like I want to get invested in politics, like I want to start in politics and like being like, okay, like I'm gonna sign up for March for Lives or I'm gonna sign up for like the Sunrise Movement and like going from there and like kind of just taking every opportunity that comes and being super invested. That's really like what's helped to get me where I am is just like taking every opportunity and like when no opportunity like presents itself to me, like finding them, like seeking them out and finding them for myself. So definitely be proactive. Um and I believe that every single person in this country um was meant to change their community. We all just have different ways of doing it. So find
yeah,
your way. Maybe you just donate money. Maybe you phone bank. Maybe you become a doctor. Maybe you like work on environmental sustainability through like engineering and architecture. Like whatever way, find your passion and use that to make good. Because I think that like really that's what everyone can do.
yeah. Okay, well, that was the last prompt. I just have to say, like, thank you so, so much. I truly, truly enjoyed speaking to you. I think that this episode is definitely what I would say is probably one of my favorites of like the podcast so far. But yeah, thank you so much. And I'm to all my viewers and listeners, yeah, I just hope that you guys enjoyed this episode. This was the last episode in the series, so I think season 5 will probably start around September, maybe October. But yeah, just thank you so much again to you, and thank you to my listeners for listening. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. And yeah, so thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you for having me.